Hello, and welcome to Revive and Rise. I'm your host, Melody Parrish, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We have Teslyn Savage. She is the manager of the Beacon House in Norfolk, Virginia. And Teslyn, welcome. Thank you for coming. And for African American History Month, we're talking about racism and trauma. And so I would love for you to share some of your experiences with our audience today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Melody. It's always a pleasure with you, always. My history, goodness. Everything started for me when I was a child. I've had a lot of just sexual abuse, sexual trauma, abandonment, just it un un what's the best word? Inappropriate actions with family members. And all of that shaped who I am today. I think my first instance, I was 6 years old, 10, 12, and at 12 years old, I was actually raped and I became pregnant. And at that point, I also started getting molested by a family friend, and that went on for about 4 to 5 years. And with my son, I was almost forced to have an abortion, which is even more traumatizing, especially as a 13-year-old. I really didn't understand what was happening, but I just knew that I still had a lot of light in me and a lot of fight in me. And it wasn't until I joined the military that I kind of came open to therapy. And as a matter of fact, when I joined the military, the person you see today is not who I was then. I was very angry. I fought a lot. And as a matter of fact, I was expelled from a school district in middle school because I fought so much. And nobody saw the pain, the anger, my lack of trust in the people around me, adults. I had difficulty making friends. And all of this really made my early adulthood life just really difficult. It was hard to create connections with people because I didn't understand myself. When I joined the military, I think in my first 2 years, I probably got in the 5 or 6 fights. I was almost put out. I've had several suicide attempts within the military, and it wasn't until the last suicide attempt when I was told that, hey, if you don't get this together, basically, you're going to be put out of the military. And when you hear that in the moment, it's devastating, to think that I'm struggling. I don't know what I'm struggling with, but I'm struggling. And instead of saying, hey, here's some help, no, you're going to get put out. You're going to be in trouble. And I think that was kind of the catalyst, and especially because I had that second suicide attempt. I loved my son. I wanted to live for him, and I did not know what to do. With the final suicide attempt, I was placed into psychiatric care for about 4 days. And in those 4 days, the word I learned was assertive. I didn't know what being assertive was because I didn't have any self-esteem. And that's from the trauma, the lack of self-care. I didn't have adults around me to teach me those things. So when I learned about assertiveness, I think that's when everything sparked. Like, okay, you've had all these childhood experiences. And I think the technical term now is adverse childhood experiences, and when we talk about those things, we I think sometimes we forget it's not just physical trauma. It could be experiencing a natural disaster like a hurricane, earthquake. And when I was young, I experienced a large earthquake. Living in California, it shut my school down. So that also added to my layers of trauma. Um, I believe it was 2003 was the first time I went to therapy. I was active duty. I went to see a military therapy actually, and I didn't like it. I hated it. When they walked in the room, I had to stand up, go to attention, salute them. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel safe. Um, so I stopped going. On and off, on and off. 2 or 3 years, on and off. I'm in and out. And not to mention, in the military, you have a weight standard that you have to sustain. Because of my trauma, I didn't have healthy eating habits. I binge ate a lot. And at that time, I didn't know that that was something, if that makes sense. I just thought this is who I am. which also led to me being overweight. I could not get promoted in the military. I couldn't take classes. I couldn't do special training because I was overweight. When I did lose the weight, I lost, I think there was one week I lost 10 pounds in a week, very unhealthy. And my first line supervisor looked at me and said, try harder. And in that moment, I said, maybe therapy, long-term therapy is good. I started going on and off and started learning a lot about myself. I believe it was 2009 when I first learned, when I even heard PTSD. And all of my trauma, I had never known what PTSD was. Even when I was in the military therapy, no one mentioned that. And at the time, you don't put the pieces together that it's your skin color sometimes that kind of limits you from receiving this information. I've known several people, people of non-color that have said, oh yeah, I've been in therapy since I was 12, 13, and it's unfortunate that there are a lot of people of color who do not get those same resources and that don't have access to those resources. I have been in therapy for over 20 years now, and I truly see the benefit. I see how much I've changed. I see how much I've grown. I understand my triggers. I understand, how I can be in a space and smell something, and it might take me back to a place. Now I have coping skills, so that way I understand and I can be present and very grounded. I think often, especially for Black people, we are limited in the information we get. In my experiences, I have never had anybody until last year ask me, hey, do you want some medication for your anxiety? And when they asked me that, I was kind of floored because I didn't know what to say. I've never had anybody really pay attention and really, at least I feel, want to support me. And when I heard that, it kind of clicked like, what about all those other times that no one asked you? Do you think it was because your race? Do you think it was because they didn't believe you? Do you think it was because they didn't think what you went through was that severe and it's not affecting you? And all these things are questions to ask when it comes to just people of color, trauma, and just overall well-being. I think a lot of people have different access to things that will really help us thrive and strive. And now I'm in a place where I still have mental health struggles. I still experience depression, anxiety. I'm still triggered, but I'm very, and I truthfully, I really give it to my therapist. Granted, I do the work. If it wasn't for my therapist, I would not be able to see who I am. I would not be able to understand post-traumatic growth because that's not something people talk about a lot. I've learned a lot through my trauma and through my struggles. And I think the biggest piece is despite what happened to me, I still had a little flicker of light in me. No matter what happened, that light, even though sometimes it would fizzle, it was still there. And I think in that growth, that means a lot. I always hear the saying, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And I think when I heard it so much, I would roll my eyes and I would be upset. But unfortunately, it's the truth. It really is. What does not kill you makes you stronger if you can really stop and try to step back and say, well, what can I learn from this experience? Anytime I ask myself that, I always think of what my family did not do. Those are the things I don't want to do. I want to listen to my son if he has an issue. And I think because we are 13 years apart in age, it's a little bit easier. He's watched me on my mental health path, on my mental health journey. He watched me struggle with taking medication, with even having the option to take it. He's watched that. So now he's in therapy. And as a Black man, that's very important. I think sometimes they get forgotten. And as a Black mother, that's very important to me. So this way we don't continue the cycle of unhealthy coping skills, not tapping into emotions. Before therapy, I did not cry. I could not cry. Could not. Now, oh, I cry at the drop of a dime. And it's because I was so tough. I had to be. I couldn't trust anybody. I couldn't let people in. And now, if the wind blows, I'm like, oh my God, it's so good to be alive. I'm so happy. And I'm just crying because I'm so grateful. I think often we go through these horrible, traumatic things, and we feel because it's happening to us, nobody will understand,
Mhm.
nobody will get me, nobody will listen, and that's not true. We really just have to identify those safe people, so that way you have a community of people to uplift you and support you. I think another piece that's very important is the piece of legal piece. You
Mhm.
know, if someone is experiencing, let's say, a manic episode, and the police are called for whatever reason, the police don't know what a manic episode looks like. They just see this individual that might harm somebody. And then that leads to legal issues. If you have legal issues and you have to pay those, you're unable to pay your rent, you're unable to buy food. You might even start doing drugs and using substances. And now you're down this path that you never saw yourself down because nobody understood you. Um, in the field that I work in, I support brain injury survivors. And one thing we're trying to do is connect with local fire departments, police stations, to kind of identify a way where people that have these brain injuries or serious mental health issues, they can put on their profile like, hey, if you get a call from this number for this address, this person, has autism or bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. So
Mhm.
this way, it's not an instant defense and people are getting arrested. There's so many things in our country that we can improve on to really help people. Trauma is different for different people. Some people may go through something what I believe is to be horrendous, and for them it's not. So trauma is a very important piece to when it comes to mental health and just understanding the individual. I encourage everybody, therapy, therapy, therapy. It might work for you. And the biggest piece of therapy is feeling comfortable with who you're speaking with. Um, for years, I went to one therapist. I would lie about things. I would miss my appointments. And it was because I didn't trust them. And
Mhm.
I remember I was like, I'm going to tell them I don't want to see them. And I was sitting in the chair and she's asking me these questions. And I just blurted out, I want to see a different therapist.
Mhm.
And because I'm in the VA system, the veteran system, um, it was a lot of paperwork to go through that. But I
Mhm.
was so proud that I advocated for myself and my mental health because I knew these appointments were a waste of time if I'm not being honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the last two therapists I've had, they have been phenomenal. They constantly remind me that I'm driving the train. I'm the captain of the ship, that I'm in charge. They're just there to help me and to guide me. So I encourage everyone, therapy, have connections. We need people.
Mhm.
We think that, oh, I don't need anybody. We do. We really do. Find your tribe. Doesn't have to be big. Find your tribe and hold on to them, share your experiences. You never know what someone has gone through until you talk.
Right.
Um, I was in school and at this point in life, I had became very defensive anytime I talked about my son because if I say, "Oh yeah, I'm this age," and my son is, this age, they'll say, they'll do the math, that quiet
Mhm.
math, and I will prepare for that. And I was like, oh, I had him when I was 13. I was raped. And not realizing, one, trauma dumping, they may not be able to help that. But
Mhm.
two, for me, it was my turn to speak my piece because in that moment, I had a thought that was very loud. Why am I ashamed? I didn't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when that landed, it changed everything. I
Mhm.
refused to carry someone else's baggage. Now, do I have to deal with the ramifications from what happened? Absolutely. But that is not my shame to carry. And once I released it and I really leaned into therapy, and was actually doing the work,
Mhm.
everything changed. Life wasn't as scary. I could slowly let people in.
Mhm.
Now I have the discernment to see when, like, hey, maybe you're not so safe for me. And that's okay. You don't have to understand it. I do.
Mhm.
And those lessons have really helped me to flourish and grow. And even where I'm sitting today, I never thought I could be here because I didn't think that I deserved good things. I didn't think I didn't think I deserved anything good. When I dated people, they were not the best people, and that's what I thought I deserved. Last year, I bought a house. That's something I never thought I deserved. I did not deserve good things. And now to sit in it and really look in my rearview mirror and look how far I have come
Mhm.
just with the talking, the being honest, doing things like this, speaking of people, connecting with people. It
Mhm.
made me feel seen. It made me feel that what I went through was important and it was worth, me being treated, me getting the medication to kind of help stabilize me to move forward.
Mhm.
It even helped in, like I said, me just speaking up for myself.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
People pleasing, that's a big piece of mental health and trauma. If you experience trauma when you're young, people pleasing keeps you safe.
Mhm.
But then as you grow and you develop, it turns into other things. You're saying yes to things that you really want to say no to.
Right.
You signed up to go to something with your friend and you really don't want to do it, but because your friend wants to do it, you're doing it.
Yeah.
That cheaps at you. So now I understand I don't have to people please. I can say no,
Mhm.
and that person can be upset, and it's okay.
Yeah. That's
You
right.
know, I'm
Yeah.
less reactionary. If something happens, I'm, oh my God, not anymore, because now I know I am in the present. You know,
Mhm.
Granted, my body will always remember that feeling of the trauma.
Yeah.
And I might get reminded when I'm in situations that my body feels like, oh no, I'm unsafe. I remind myself, and I'll literally put my hand on my heart and I'll say today's date. And I'll remind myself where I am. I'll take a few deep breaths and I calm myself. I
Mhm.
couldn't do that before. I was so deep and stuck in my trauma that I didn't see,
Mhm.
and just struggling with my mental health has really allowed me to just grow and flourish.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And you've offered us several little tips of things to do. And I really like you just reminding yourself of the date. That's really important and that's really good. I did want to ask you, did you feel you talked about your early stages of trauma and when you were just angry and you would fight and do things like that. Do you think that that just kind of slid under the radar because you're an African American woman? Because I know that a lot of times that gets stereotyped as the angry Black woman. So
Mhm.
do you feel like you were stereotyped that way?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then family, right? In Black families, there's generational trauma from slavery.
Mhm,
Most people are, I would say, Black people, maybe 3 generations away from slavery. I was raised by my great grandparents, my grandmother's mother and her husband. And they were born in the early 1900s. So I
mhm,
got a lot of beatings. There was no something's going on, something's wrong. No, I'm acting out. I deserve to get a whooping. I would get whooped with switches,
mhm,
belts, extension cords, whatever they can put their hands on. I would get beat with it.
mhm,
So there was never a piece of, hey, something's going on. It's more of you're acting out. And as I grew in high school, I was definitely marked as the angry teenager with the attitude.
mhm,
Anybody who looked at me, I was willing to fight. And it was because no one understood me. I think I was shouting for help and expressing, hey, something is going on. But I didn't have any support around me, especially in the 90s. There were no resources for therapy, especially for Black people. You
Mhm.
know, you had to really be in you had to really have some type of wealth or some type of money
Mhm.
to access these things. I didn't even know what therapy was until I was about 16. Never heard of it, you
Yeah.
know, didn't know about PTSD trauma, nothing. And I
Mhm.
think being a African American woman had a big role to play in that. And even when I was after I was raped and I got pregnant, I was just starting my eighth grade year. And I remember going to the doctor and they said, "Oh, you're fast." That was the term then, you're being fast.
Mhm.
Um, and that really sat with me because with my great grandparents, they always said, "You're going to be just like your mom. You're going to lay up and you're going to have all these kids."
Mhm.
And keep in mind, my mom was 16 when she had me, which means she has some trauma, you know. And I will always hear that in my head. And when I got raped, I heard that loud and clear. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be just like my mom. I'm going to have all these kids. I'm not going to have any support. So, of course, chipped even more at my self esteem. And because I was starting eighth grade, I still had to go to school.
Mhm.
So they put me in it was a special school for pregnant teens.
Mhm.
It was a trailer in the back of the school where nobody could see us. And every morning I would catch the city bus, and I had this burgundy coat that I just loved to wear because it would hide my stomach. I would be able to hide, you know, because I was definitely ashamed. And there was a lady who rode the bus. She was the nicest lady, just so kind. We would always talk, and I would always have my coat on. So she just thought I was heavy. There was one day my mom took my coat and said I could not wear it. So I get on the bus, and she's like, "Oh my God, you're pregnant." And I remember the look on her face. It made me feel even worse because
Mhm.
I'm thinking, oh, well, this is a nice lady. She doesn't know anything about me. I feel normal, for
Yeah.
lack of better terms, you know. And when
Mhm.
she said that, it made me want to hide even more. You know, I started high school with a child. No, I still graduated on time. I was prom queen, you know, so I was able to still lead somewhat of a teenager's life, you know,
Mhm.
but I still had responsibilities. Not to mention, I'm the oldest of six kids.
Mhm.
So I had a lot of responsibility early on because that's another piece that in Black households, the oldest is the responsible person for the children. If there's no father in the household, the son is the man of the household, which is not healthy, you
Yeah.
know. And I think definitely being a Black woman, the fighting was missed. It was just labeled as something else. And that's what actually got me expelled out of a middle school. Yep. Because I
Mhm.
was fighting and they didn't understand. And they said, well, you know what? You got to go to school, but you can't go to school in this district. So I got bused. I think it was about 2 hours away from my home. And I had a school counselor. I cannot remember her name, but she definitely made a big impact on me because I think she was one of the first people to see, like, hey, something is going on. Um, and what she would do is she would kind of set up this goal system for me. Like, if
Mhm.
I didn't get in trouble throughout the week, on Friday, I could get 2 bags of hot Cheetos for free.
Oh.
She knew I loved hot Cheetos. And for me, that was a small motivator, you know, to
Yeah.
kind of keep focused, to stay on course.
Mhm.
And I would say towards the end of my seventh grade year, my mother, she came and she got me. She took me to live with her. But it wasn't a very healthy way. Since I was bused about 2 hours away, when I got off the bus to walk home, and I think it was about a 20-minute walk home, I see my mom waving at me, and I'm excited, you know, because I'm like, oh, this is my mom. This is my mom. In that moment, she told me to get in the van and that I'm going with her. My great grandparents were terrified because I did not come home. She didn't communicate that, which is another piece of trauma. Now I'm uprooted from the people that I know as family. And now I'm going to this environment. I barely knew my mom. I didn't know my siblings. And now I'm thrusted into an environment not only that's unfamiliar with unfamiliar people, with the new responsibilities that I've never had. And that's months after that is when the rape happened. And I used to say, The moment I moved with my mom, life went downhill. But I don't say that anymore. There were a lot of things that happened. I think I moved with her, it might have been March, no, it was May of 97. Between May of 97 and August of 97, I had been molested by two different people and raped by a school friend. And that was the pregnancy. So in a very short period of time, I moved to a new place, new location. I changed schools, and then sexual trauma after sexual trauma after sexual trauma. And I didn't realize until maybe 2 years ago, like, hey, that's a lot for a
So,
very, very short period of time.
yeah.
Of course you were angry. Of
Mhm.
course you were acting out.
Mhm.
Of course you had all these feelings and bottled up because nobody taught me how to do these things.
Yeah.
Nobody showed me, hey, there's a different way you can express this. Nobody even knew what was happening.
Yeah.
And my mom, now I am healed to where I can say, I understand that generational trauma is a big piece. I found out that my grandmother was on drugs for the majority of my mother's childhood, and she also sold my mom for sex.
Oh,
So that's another piece to that. I can't expect someone to give me something that they don't have.
right.
My mom had me at 16. She had five kids in between 16 and 22.
Oh,
You know,
oh, yeah.
so now I understand. I can reflect and say, well, if that was me, I would probably be doing the same things.
Mhm.
Even with my son, we grew up together. When I graduated, he was 4.
Mhm.
So as a mother, you want to be able to teach your kids, how to manage money, how to maintain a household. How can you do that if you're learning how to do it?
Right.
So now the space that I'm in, me and my son were very close. I communicate with him everything. I'm very transparent. I say, hey, at your age, I didn't know how to manage money. Nobody
Mhm.
taught me. Not only did I have to manage money, a household, my son, I had a military career. I can't get put out for my mental health. I just got to suck it up and move on. So I am proud to say that I did not continue the trauma that has been passed down in my family. My son is making sure it also stops with him, which is why he's going to therapy. Um, he's always known that he is a product of rape, and he's never been treated as such. I love my son deeply, and he has been a big motivating factor of me still being present and kicking and thriving. So
Mhm.
I definitely think sometimes in the Black community, we get labeled immediately. And
Yeah.
even if we look at the drug epidemic in the late 80s, early 90s, people of non-color, they would go to drug rehabs. People
Mhm.
of color, you're going to jail.
Yeah.
There's a
Mhm.
big difference, and it's so disheartening that in 2025, we've made small steps, but we need those big leaps. You know, I love that these opportunities are available to have these connections so that way we can share our stories because nobody knows what you've gone through unless you share it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And sometimes as a Black woman, it's hard to know who to trust.
Mhm.
Are you safe for me to say this is my experience? Are you going to judge me? Are you going to go tell somebody else?
Yeah.
you know so I always say when you find someone and you know that they are safe, hold on to them. Don't be afraid because they're going to accept you as you are, where you are, regardless of what you've gone through, regardless of what you've done in the past. I have 3 rock solid friends,
Mhm.
and I adore them. I'm so grateful for them. They did not leave me in times when my depression was so bad that I couldn't talk. They didn't
Mhm.
leave me in times when I said, hey, I just need some time. And that time might have been 6 months to a year. They didn't leave me. They just gave me space and they made sure
Mhm.
that they were present in whatever I needed. So
Yeah.
please, please, please make sure you connect with people. It's so important. Share your experiences. Find a support group, find online therapy, something just so that way you could cope and identify, hey, what's this thing about? let me figure this out. Even with binge eating, I didn't know that was a thing until 2009,
Mhm.
and I didn't get diagnosed until what year is this? 25 until 2022.
Wow.
Did not get a diagnosis.
Mhm.
So I always say, speak up, be honest with what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, what you're
Mhm.
going through. Um, every time I see my psychiatrist, they'll ask
Mhm.
me all these questions. And in the past, I would lie because I'm like, no, I don't want to be that person. Now when he asks, hey, do you procrastinate? Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Are you forgetful? Yes. Yes. And sometimes is it difficult for you to be in public? Yes.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Because if you're honest, you get the help that you need, you
Right.
know. And
Yeah.
I think just being an African American in America is it can be tough sometimes.
Yeah.
Not to mention the state of America right now. But when we drill down into these things, generational trauma, lack of resources, lack of education,
Yeah.
some people don't even have running water in their homes.
Mhm.
So important. Make sure we're talking, we're connecting, we're communicating because you never know who you might come across that will listen, that will kind of guide you and give you resources.
Yeah, yeah, and my friend was talking about the education part. I'm so glad that you said something because, you know, I feel like so many things are not offered. They're not offered to people, but they're especially not offered to people of color. And if not just like mental health or healthcare, but in every aspect. My friend was talking about how financially they were never taught anything. They were never taught about buying a home or anything like that. They didn't even know those opportunities were available for them. Um, so that's pretty important too. Um, and the information's out there, but a lot of times you don't know where to start, you don't know how to look. So in those instances, what can you offer our listeners, especially being an African American woman, those safe spaces that they can go or people they can talk to?
Absolutely. I think one, rely on the community that you already have. If you have really close friends that you're close to, just ask them, hey, can we talk? There's something I need to get off and I don't know where to start.
Mhm.
That right there is a start. Just opening your mouth and letting the words come out. That's a start. If you have access to any social services, go there as well. Don't let anybody tell you no, as uncomfortable as it may be to push, because that's what they're there for. That is their jobs. In the event that you do start therapy and you do not feel, excuse me, you don't feel safe with your therapist, do not be afraid to say that. Do not, because this is about you. It's not about them. It's not about their feelings. It's about you. I think another important piece, which I know can be difficult, write, write. Journal, journal, journal. Even if it's one word, start so small that it's so easy that you can do it in your sleep. Even if you start one word of how you felt for the day, angry, leave it at that. Find what really works for you. For me, it's a kind of modge podge of things. I have a therapist. I do a very short meditation, yoga nidra. Encourage everybody to check that out because you literally just lay there and go to sleep. Very easy. I've changed a lot of habits. I don't have a TV in my room. I try to make sure I go to bed, try my best, go to bed at the same time. There are a lot of things that we can do just within ourselves first. I think another big piece is don't be afraid to call those suicide hotlines. You know, do not be afraid. They are not going to judge you. That's what they're there for. As of right now, I don't have any suicidal ideations. It's been several years. I still have that number in my phone.
Mhm.
If you have a panic attack, an anxiety attack, call that number. They will support you. They will stay on the line with you. You don't have to even get services from them. You can say, "Hey, I just need someone to talk to." That's an anonymous, unbiased person. They're not going to judge you, and I think it's such a wonderful resource because it's free. that line will also give you resources to social services, therapy, support groups. I think support group is a wonderful way to kind of
Mhm,
slide into therapy if you're not comfortable with one-on-one.
mhm.
What I gain from support groups is hearing that, oh, somebody else has experienced this. Oh my God, and that's the biggest piece when you hear it come from someone else's mouth. You're like, oh, I'm not invisible. I'm not crazy.
Mhm.
All the things that I've been feeling, these things are valid and it's for a reason.
Yeah,
So definitely try support groups. Lean on your friends, your family, and sometimes your family are your friend,
yeah.
you know. Um,
Mhm,
self-care, 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 self-care. Take care of yourself.
mhm.
Sometimes self-care is saying no. Sometimes it's eating an orange, you
Mhm.
know, take care of yourself. That's a big piece. And I think the most important piece is be honest and meet yourself where you are. You know, the way I got here today is a lot of work. Sometimes it was easy, sometimes it wasn't. But you have to be honest about where you are. You have to be honest about your feelings. Um, and you
Mhm.
just have to learn how to identify those safe people. Once you have that tribe, you have it. You really do. Just don't be afraid to ask for help. You
Yeah,
know, we are not alone. We're on this planet trying to do the best we can. Even though our experiences are unique, they're differently unique, but everybody can kind of chip in and say, well, that happened to me. And I didn't know this is why I was doing that.
right.
We don't think that certain things connect when they do.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest piece, be kind to yourself and give yourself grace. Give yourself more grace than you give the person that helps you. Give yourself triple times grace, especially in those times when you're hard on yourself. You need grace.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely.
Oh, this has been so wonderful, Tesla. I want to thank you so, so much for your openness, your honesty, and for helping our listeners, giving them, uh, strength and tactics and tips. It's wonderful. I had never thought about the suicide line, just to talk to somebody to get resources, but that's excellent resource.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you so much for being with us today, and feel free to come back anytime. I
Yes.
always love having you. So thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Melody. I really appreciate you and I appreciate your cause and what you're doing. And I know several others out there too.
Well, thank you. And I want to end the show, and just remember that you do not have to suffer alone. Thank you so much.